Hello, and welcome to the C.S. Lewis College webinar series, a joint production of the C.S. Lewis Foundation and C.S. Lewis College. Today we have the pleasure to speak with Davis Bunn about his life, his work, and the power of storytelling. I'd like to thank all of our volunteers and donors who have made this day possible. We are so blessed that many of you have been part of our lives for over 34 years now. You are truly our community and our family, and help us and others to live the legacy of C.S. Lewis. A quick note for today's webinar, please look at the bottom of your screen and you'll notice that one of the icons says Q&A. This is where you'll be able to type in your questions and vote on other people's questions. We very much encourage you to do so. Throughout the call, we will answer as many of these questions as we can. Before we start though, I'd like to open with a prayer. Father Jesus, thank you so much for our ability to meet here virtually in a time when so many of us aren't able to meet together in person. I pray that this call will be a source of encouragement, an encouragement for writers and for artists, and also an encouragement to all of those who wish to integrate and unite their work with their faith. I specifically ask for a blessing on all of those who are gathered here today and all of their friends and families in these uncertain and unusual times. In your holy name, Jesus. Amen. Everyone, I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator today, Amber Saladin. Amber is a professional working musician in New York City as a choral director for various organizations. And she also serves as church music director at Emmanuel Anglican Church. She's also on staff at the C.S. Lewis Foundation as our artist coordinator for many of our events. And she will be leading a breakout session next summer, at our Oxbridge 2021 conference in England. Amber, welcome. It's great to see you today. How are you?
Thanks, Steve. I'm good. It's a great day in Manhattan, and you might be able to hear the music coming from the street, which makes it it's more fun that way.
all how these Zooms work. It adds to the flavor.
Now today, I'd like to welcome our guest of honor, Davis Bunn. Davis, can you join me on the screen? There you are. Hello.
Hi.
So here's a bit about Davis for those of us who may or may not know you. Davis Bunn's novels have sold in excess of 8 million copies in 24 languages. He has appeared on numerous national bestseller lists, and his titles have been main or featured selections with every major U.S. book club. In the past 12 months, Davis has had multiple titles featured as non-picks and starred reviews by the Library Journal, Publishers Weekly, and RT Reviews and Booklist. Davis serves as writer-in-residence at Regent's Park College at Oxford University, and until recently was a lecturer in Oxford's new creative writing program. In 2011, his novel Lion of Babylon was named Best Book of the Year by Library Journal, and the sequel entitled Rare Earth won Davis his 4th Christy Award for Excellence in Fiction in 2013. More recently, Trial Run was named Best Book of the Year by Suspense Magazine, and he has appeared on the cover of Southern Writers Magazine, Publishers Weekly, and Christian Retailing. Currently, Davis is under contract to write a new television streaming series based upon his best-selling series, Miramar Bay. Welcome, Davis. Hello.
It must be very impressive. I'm sorry, he's not here, so I'll have to take his place today.
Well, you do have a pseudonym, sir. I could just call you Thomas the whole time.
No, Davis is fine.
So I just want to remind those of us who are here that there is a Q&A button on your screen. At any time, you can pop on that Q&A, and I've got it open on my screen so I can see some of your questions. Davis is going to say lots of interesting things, and I have things to ask him, but you might decide you have a burning question, and now is your chance. So Davis, I poked around a little bit about you, and I found out some interesting things. Because
Here we go.
oh yeah, well, somebody who writes books all the time, you want your characters to speak, I'm sure, and you want a little but we want to know a little bit more about you, Davis the man. So I hear that you are a serious cyclist. Is this true?
Yes, that's my brother is an Ironman competitor, and when we first came to England, when my wife started her doctorate here, we were living near the River Thames, and I got involved in rowing. I've been a waterman all of my life, either sailing or surfing competitively. Fell in love with rowing, and then, of course, what do we do? But we moved to the furthest point from any body of water in England, in this region called the Cotswolds.
Yeah.
And my brother was just after me. I was moaning to him a little bit too much, and he started sending me these articles from his outdoor magazines about cycling in the Cotswolds, which is supposed to be one of the best places in the world for doing this. And basically, to shut him up, I went out and bought a bike, paid $25 for it, and overpaid. And I'm not going to tell you how much I paid for my most recent bike, but I have it is a very expensive addiction, but I'm doing about 150 miles a week now.
Oh my lands. That's like to
That's a
London
lot.
and back.
Yes, it is. Not all in one go, but yeah, that's about right.
That's amazing. Now, I also hear you're an early bird, but your wife is the latest night owl.
This is, I don't know where you're getting this information. These
I'll
are
tell you
supposed to be
later.
family secrets.
Oh, I see. I'll tell you later. But how do you just, you have lunch together and that's about it?
Isabella's best work time is from after the news, so 7 o'clock until midnight. And my best work time is from 5 o'clock until lunchtime, basically. So really, those 3 hours before she gets up are the most productive times of my day. But yeah, it's amazing. It works extremely well. It really does.
That's wonderful. Now, I hear that must really help you with your discipline as a writer. I hear you're a very disciplined writer. So those hours, how do you set those aside in the day? Are those just, these are the hours I'm going to work and I'm going to write, and that's all that you're doing?
When I started, I was a management consultant based in Germany, and I was traveling to 2 and sometimes 3 countries every week. And it was just, I mean, the easiest thing in the world at that stage would have been to quit. I wrote for 9 years and finished 7 books before my first was accepted for publication. Yeah. And there were a number of lessons that came out of that, but one of those was needing to find the time that is, without question, my creative point, and holding that as basically a sacred. I mean, if I'm assuming that this is truly a gift and I'm doing what is intended with it, then part of this is honoring the discipline that's required to make that happen.
Yeah.
But I do think having forced myself to learn this when I was still working full-time at a day job has put me in a position now where my normal output is 4 full-length projects a year, sometimes 5, and it's not uncomfortable. It's just how it feels. You know, I can really. I'm not saying this is something that should be aimed for, but I really do sympathize with those writers who struggle for every word. But I just, if I had allowed the struggle to dominate and the time that it took to get published initially, I would not be a writer today. Yeah. That's really all I can say about it.
Yeah. I remember reading about Madeleine L'Engle having a very similar story, you know, writing for years and years before seeing publication. And that's just an encouragement to those of us who are artists and wanting to work in what we do and wanting to see something different come out of life. And that perseverance is it's a gift.
It has to be perseverance and flexibility, because obviously if what you had as your comfort zone, your preliminary talent was enough, then it would not take this long. Yes. So the risk is, and it is the biggest issue I face in teaching, is that the student must go into this, or the would-be professional artist of any ilk must go into this with the acceptance that there must be a willingness to grow beyond where you are and what is comfortable. This means accepting, there's actually two sides to this, I think. There needs to be an awareness of where your strong points are. I think the tendency for most artists when they have a difficulty, when they have a rejection, is to question their overall ability. And if that happens, then when they are working on something, it's easy for me, the outsider, to say, don't get into a repetitive pattern. The problem is not, obviously no one's going to want to repeat the problems and do the same mistakes over again. The problem, though, is if you don't accept your strengths, the tendency when you have an issue, when you feel doubt over what you're doing, is to overemphasize the strengths and not look for the weaknesses. And so it grows more out of balance. What you have to do is to be aware of the strengths and be willing to adjust the weaknesses. The example I like to use is with professional sports stars. A professional sportsman spends 90% of his or her training time on the 10% weakest component of their craft.
That's encouraging. 90%, say that again, Davis.
90% of their training time is spent on the 10% weakest component of their craft.
So we're getting a little personal pretty early, but are you willing to share with us what is the 10% weakest component of your craft? What have you had to work the hardest on? When
I first was published, the first book that came out in 1990 was a political drama called The Presence, and it went on to become a finalist for the Evangelical Christian Publishers Association, what's called the Gold Medallion, the Book of the Year Award. And it was a national bestseller. I won a couple of other awards. And then my next 4 titles were just barely earning out their advance, which means literally that one bad book, one book that was not accepted by the audience, by the readership, would have ended my career. And
that's pressure.
It was not only that, but Isabella and I both had left our day jobs because she'd been invited to do her doctorate here, and also she promised that we would only be here for 3 years, and that was 31 years ago.
That always happens.
Oh, did that happen in your family? How interesting.
Sort of. Yeah.
So around the time that I was handing in that 4th book, I was reading an anthology of great thinkers, and there was this quote from Aristotle, and I don't know if I'll probably get the wording incorrect somewhere, but it basically said, great minds focus on ideas, mediocre minds focus on events, and weak minds focus on people. And certainly as far as my writing was concerned, probably in a lot of other ways, I have what Aristotle would class a weak mind, because my primary focus is on the people, on the characters inside the story, the dialogue, the structure, and I build the events from that.
Yeah.
Ideas come very difficult to me, and I took that as a challenge, as perhaps the issue that I needed to face directly without delay, and had spent about 2 months looking for something that might spur me to go into a deeper, more profound sort of idea concept. And a professor who was a friend at Oxford, a historian, invited me and Isabella over for dinner one night, and they were talking, this group of academics were talking about this book that they universally hated. And they hated it especially because it had sold almost 5 million copies. But it was a history book that was written by a person who was not a historian. He was a television presenter, a former spy, and I can't remember, something to do with the military, but he had become very passionate about the early church. His name is John Julius Norwich. And he wrote a book about the turning point when Christianity came out of the catacombs and became effectively the both religious and political force of the Roman Empire in the early 4th century. It was called Byzantium. And basically because they were so upset about it and how successful he had been, I thought, I've got to read this. And the thing that caught me was the fact that he was just so passionate about this. He had taught himself not just about the epoch, but also how to write about the epoch, and just did a marvelous job. So I decided that at some point in my career, I wanted to do a Dr. Zhivago type of romance adventure around the point at which Constantine, the first Christian emperor of the Roman Empire, around the point where he died. And the last of the big civil wars began, where 2 of his sons sided with the Roman temple hierarchy and 1 with the Christian church.
Right.
And basically that was the deciding point that effectively formed so much of the church as we know it today, from the Council of Nicaea just before he died to this point, about 6 months after his death, when the Civil War began. And lo and behold, I was invited to go to the CBA that year, the Christian Booksellers Convention. And the 3rd day that I was there, I heard from one of the people that I knew, one of the bookstore owners, came around and said that there was a man by the name of Jan Dennis who was looking for me. And Jan Dennis was known within the industry at that point for the man who had discovered Frank Peretti of This Present Darkness, which at the time was the biggest selling Christian novel ever. It outsold, it was a huge phenomenon at that point.
Even I read that.
Right. And Jan had just been named the president of a new imprint at Thomas Nelson called Two Rivers, which was going to be Thomas Nelson's attempt to move into mainstream fiction. And what I didn't know is that I was like number 30 on the list, that Jan had been trying to speak to all of the authors in all the novelists in the CBA, and he just finally worked his way down to me. And obviously it was authors that he thought had the potential of perhaps crossing over. Yeah. But I went over to the Thomas Nelson booth and met him, and Jan said that he was setting this up, and he thought that perhaps I had the potential, did I have an idea that was big enough to warrant the opportunity? And lo and behold, I did. Yeah. And that was my breakout moment. That was the first time that I went from being basically a hand-to-mouth author to actually having a force in the industry. And it was because of that preparation. So I think really there are 2 steps that I would say come to the point where you are able to identify what this next issue is that has to be addressed. Right. The first, as I said, there needs to be this acceptance of your strengths and then learning how to set them aside. In other words, simply because you have a problem doesn't invite you to rest on what is comfortable. The second thing is to work on one weakness at a time. It's not that you must succeed at everything at once. I'm still dealing with really big issues right now having to do with screenwriting, but it's still, and a number of other things with different projects. But I do feel like that, not necessarily with every project, but very often, say every second or third project, there's an awareness of a new issue that I simply have to get better. So this is an ongoing process. This is after 77 published novels and 9 screenplays that I'm still facing this issue. As long as you're not going to be resting on your laurels, there needs to be this acceptance of the next step.
Yeah.
But over time, there's a gaining of confidence. If you can overcome one weakness, if you can do one thing that makes this element in your creative world right, it adds so much, so much.
So I heard you say in an interview that, and I'm hoping this was right, that just 2 weeks after you became a Christian was when you started writing, that this wasn't something you did as a child. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did you come to faith? How has that influenced your writing? And how does your faith influence your writing today?
That's too many questions. We could be here for days on that. I'll start, and then you tell me when it's time to shut up and move on to the next question, okay?
Sure.
Okay. So I had been working, I did my graduate studies, my undergraduate and graduate studies were in international finance, economics, and I did a sidebar in psychology simply because it was interesting to me, but it was something that I knew I would never be satisfied with. So it was just, I did 2 degrees as an undergraduate and 2 as a graduate student.
Yeah, you were a slacker.
Yeah, I finished and went and taught for a year at a Swiss university, and then was hired by an Arab consortium and spent 6 months of the year in southern Switzerland and northern Italy where their factories were, and 6 months a year in Africa and the Middle East where their markets were. And after 4 years of that, I was hired to become a management consultant. So during this period, there was like this gathering of all of the little toys that, you assume are going to be the things. I certainly assumed there were going to be things that made me happy. And there was that moment, that crushing moment of coming to the point where I had a very real choice of either staying willfully blind or accepting that I was on the wrong path. And the problem was, if I accepted that I was on the wrong path, there was this terrifying awareness that I had no idea what to do.
Yeah.
So part of this was coming to faith, and that's, I'm just going to set that aside. It was a huge series of just miraculous events that brought me to the point of accepting faith and accepting this actually as a living component of my daily life. 2 weeks later, there was that sense of, okay, this is real.
Yeah.
It took about a year from that initial being struck in the face with that awful mirror to arriving at the point where accepting faith was me.
Yeah.
2 weeks later, I was in Frankfurt for I had driven down the day before for a meeting, and over a solitary dinner that night, there was this sort of ongoing dialogue that had been continuous through that entire year of what to do. And there was that sense of, well, I've been a reader all of my life. I used to get punished for spending so much time with books as a kid. Why not try writing? And I was arrived at the conference center early, and I was sitting at this table downstairs in the hotel's main lobby, and I can still remember the smell of the wax on the desk where I was writing. There was that just electric sense of just everything coalescing around this. And now, I mean, at the time, I didn't even know the term spiritual gift, but I think really what was happening was it would have been probably impossible. You know, it's hindsight is hindsight is not 2020. Believe me, it may have been possible for me to do it, but knowing what a slacker I am when it comes to self-indulgence, probably not. I would not have done the things I needed to do to make faith the center point of my life just for the element of faith. It just was not have been enough. But for my professional life, you know, from my job, absolutely. I've been doing that all my life. So I was given this, in that moment of eternal wisdom, I was given that opportunity to know a spiritual gift before I even knew what the words were, because in order to make it happen, while I was, you know, with the day job and traveling and working constantly, that the only way that I could find not just the time, but the energy to make this real was if I sacrificed all of those things that I really needed to sacrifice anyway for faith in order to bring my life in a line with this sense of the spiritual walk.
Isn't the Lord kind? I mean,
Yes.
I've experienced some really interesting things like that in my life too, where the Lord just makes it clear, but he was kind enough to you to make it clear not just in your personal life, but in your professional life. And then it's like you can't help but follow his leading for you because it's everywhere. It's all of your life. What a kindness of the Lord. How do you see the role of the Christian writer in engaging in culture? I mean, now that you've been a Christian writer for a while, do you feel like you have something to say to just Christians, or are you thinking, no, Christian writers have something to say to the wider world around us? Or how do you engage with those thoughts?
I've written about half of my titles within the evangelical community, and so I have stood on, really, it's like a centipede. It's not just, you know, in the Christian world and in the mainstream world, because there is no in the mainstream world. I have written romantic drama, contemporary suspense, the near-time sci-fi under Thomas Locke, the fantasy under Thomas Locke, and it is a one of these multifaceted questions. Just to give you an example, I met, and I'm not going to name her, but I met at the height of my success in the Christian arena. I had two very disappointing, painful experiences, almost back to back. It was one of these first opportunities where I was meeting a very, very big international bestseller from the mainstream, who also was a believer. And we were having a conversation, and she had never heard of me and was surprised to hear from someone that was there at this conference with us the success that I'd had. And then she learned that I was writing within the evangelical publishing world. And her comment was, "Oh, you really must climb out of that ghetto."
Yeah.
So that was the one side. And then the next, it was not the same conference, but it was a lead off from the conference. I was interviewed on the radio by someone who was not a believer, who had read one of my books and basically just said, "Well, I just thought it was awful. I mean, how can you write this sort of stuff?" And that, I think, pretty much typifies this issue of who is making this judgment. I mean, it's one of the very difficult elements of looking at art of any kind. One example, Jeanette Oak writes Little House on the Prairie type of stories, and I think Little House on the Prairie is a perfect example of this on the television side. But looking at Jeanette's success, a lot of people consider her work to be, I mean, the example in the painting world would be the sort of the Grandma Moses type of work.
Okay.
And for a lot of people, this simplistic style is it's sentimental. In the art world, the definition of sentimentality is it's emotion that hasn't been earned on the page. And I don't think that's true with Jeanette. I think a lot of people would assume it is, but Jeanette's current series on Hallmark is called When Calls the Heart. And each year they do a contest where Jeanette will meet with viewers. There's a contest that's run sort of like a trivial contest on the books and the television series. And last year, and these people have to pay, it's just they're allowed to come and spend 3 days on set, one of which was with Jeanette, and then they get a chance to watch one scene being filmed. And last year there were 60,000 applicants for 200 places from 42 different countries. So who says that this is sentimental? Obviously the readership does not. So really what we have to decide on before we talk about this issue of, who are we addressing is the question of really what is the intended audience?
Right.
Now, if we are writing for an evangelical community that feels threatened by the outside world and feels their values are not being taken seriously by mainstream entertainment, then their choices are limited. And there is this opportunity to find this incredible passion when they identify with something that is not something just safe, but something that they find encouraging, that grants them that sense of positive hope. On the other side, and one of the reasons why I did start writing for the mainstream, besides this feeling of artistic restlessness, is wanting to be a voice for these type of issues inside a community that really doesn't care about being challenged. I mean, we're talking about postmodern structure, both in culture and society, where the heroic concept is denigrated. It is considered part of the past. It's not something that applies.
Right.
So to come in with an issue where you are talking about or writing with this question, is there absolute right and wrong? Is there hope to be found in dark moments? Can you find a love that is lasting? These are questions that are not welcome by many. And it's been one of the real issues that I've had to face in making this transition, is finding allies that are willing to give me a chance.
Yeah. And is this part of your transition to film as well? I mean, have you, because I know you're transitioning into having writing film scripts and plays and having some of your work produced that way. Are you finding that you're wrestling with some of these ideas in the film industry as well?
It's interesting. The answer is yes and no. I mean, to be perfectly blunt, I was turned down today thank you. I was turned down today by a production group that's working with Netflix on a project that had been sold, and then the company was sold, and the screenplay was, and all of their film projects were dumped.
Oh.
But there is a particular type of story structure that is very powerful right now, particularly within the streaming services, which is focusing on the dark, on the edgy, on the on pushing the boundaries between, for example, science fiction and horror.
Right.
And I did not know it, but I suspect the people, I've heard one interview by one of the people that was involved with this group, and I wonder if perhaps this is what I was confronting. And I may never know, There's another side, though, and this side, the big difference in Hollywood, and this is one of the things that I try to talk about with authors who are looking at a translation of one of their pet, their babies into film work.
Yes.
A successful novel these days, a highly successful novel, may sell 100,000 copies. For a feature film, okay, COVID has changed everything, but last year, 2019, the average studio feature, in other words, not the highest, but the average cost of production of a feature that was done by one of the major studios was $65 million. Added to this will be the marketing and publicity costs, which is somewhere around 2/3 to 100% of the production cost, which means that in order to break even, they have to sell somewhere around 100 million tickets.
Mm-hmm.
So they are looking,
yes,
they're looking at a very different audience. And what is happening is there's this delineation, and the COVID crisis and moving to streaming has sharpened this.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are looking at the major blockbusters are in many cases very willing to talk about heroic structure because they are not selling just to the modern American postmodern culture. They have to reach a much broader audience.
Yeah.
And within this group, I have found a very welcoming response.
That's wonderful.
Thanks.
There's an audience question on something like this about the dark. So Nan Ranella, hi Nan, says, many of your male characters have experienced tragedy. And then she says, as a female writer, she wants to write, real men. And she's binged on a lot of your books recently, in part to learn about how you write male characters. Many of your male characters have experienced tragedy. Did this come from personal experience, or is it just really good characterization?
Thank you, Nan. That's a lovely question, and it's got several parts. So I'll handle the specific first. The answer, I was trying to think of any specific incidents where one of my characters has had an experience that's similar to mine, and I can't think of that. There's a very famous quotation from, I want to say it was F. Scott Fitzgerald, but I can't remember. It may have been Hemingway. One of the turn of the century authors was talking about what it meant to build an emotional structure in a character. Mm-hmm. And he said, a good novelist is someone who can watch a toy boat rock in a bathtub and see a group of men dying at sea.
Yeah.
And so there's in looking at tragedy, there's an element of risk each time. And I find both with male and female characters that if you're going, and this is the other side of it, if you are going to elicit a sense of harmony between yourself and the audience, where you are creating a character with a positive element, something that is actually a role model of one kind or another, the only way that this is palatable in today's society is if you balance it with something that is really structurally difficult. Not necessarily a tragedy. It can be a challenging situation that is faced at the same time that the opportunity is realized. Mm-hmm. But my first experience with this was actually with a female character. I wrote a book. My grandmother, who had a very big influence on me when I was growing up, my mother's mother, was having very serious health issues, which actually during the time that I was writing the story caused her to pass away. And there was this what I wanted was simply to try to portray the type of woman that she was. And in many respects, she was a saint. But you can't write a saint as part of fiction. There has to be something that balances it.
Right.
And the only way that I could do this, I felt, was if she had reached this period of sainthood in her life by knowing that she was dying. And it worked magnificently. The story was called The Quilt, and it ended up being my first international bestseller. And it's just a tiny little book, 40,000 words, but it was just a glorious experience to have that sense of, that was the first time I realized that sense of what it means to balance the light and the dark in a character's life.
Yeah, I'm going to write that down, The Quilt.
Yeah.
So I can go and get that. I have a couple more questions for you. Anitra's asking, this is interesting, Anitra. She says, how do you guard against using, quote, God told me to write this as a crutch in your life? Or maybe rephrase, how do you balance the inspiration of the Spirit and the acknowledgement of your spiritual gifts and the need for hard work for your craft?
When I was first getting published, these people have remained friends for now 31 years. Gary and Carol Johnson. Gary was the publisher at Bethany House, and Carol, his wife, was the editor-in-chief. And at one of the first dinners we had, they were, and these are very, very good, good-hearted, deeply spiritual, and wonderful role models, but at the same time, they are, at the time, they were the two heads, the financial head and the creative head of the most successful publisher of Christian fiction in the world. So there's an element of cynicism that has to creep in at some point. You know, they're turning down maybe 1,000 manuscripts for each one that they accept. And one of the things that they hate, it was, you could just see the cringing was having someone come up to them and say, God told me to write this, because the thing that they would never say, but that they always thought was, well, God hasn't told me to publish it.
Right.
So there has to be this very clear disassociation between the creative process and the commercial process. Okay. And I have two suggestions for how the questioner could approach this.
Okay.
The first is to never speak about your book until you are able to do the story on one page. In other words, until you've created an overview that's workable with a New York house or an LA film world.
Okay.
Where
elevator pitch, people call it, right?
That's right. Well, the elevator pitch is actually would be the log line. It would be the first paragraph. Or what I do is I'll put a boldface, one sentence at the top and the bottom. I try to have two elevator pitches, because in many cases this is used by the salespeople in presenting the book. They're always looking for something like that. But
yeah,
an overview has to have the what if. So if you can tell the story in a page, then you've gotten to the point where you are looking at it both as a creative endeavor and a product. The other side of this is, and it would be very difficult, I think, for someone who's still in that early stage of creative development, but for myself, I would urge them to never look at the rewrite. In other words, do not go back and reread what you are working on until you have finished the first draft. The goal during the process is not to get every sentence perfect. The goal is to finish the story and have a complete whole concept that's done. Because in many cases, you don't know what is needed, what is required in terms of changes, until you have seen the story in its entirety. But the big issue is the creative process is one where, to be able to have that sense of flow, of constancy, you need to feel like that you are the right person telling the best story possible at the perfect moment in time. When you're doing your second draft, you have to be a surgeon. You have to go into this with this idea of cutting everything extemporaneously and looking at it critically from this transition point of moving from your baby into a product for the outside world.
Yeah. Do you feel like, and I mean, as a musician, I feel this way, you know, that there's both that sense of inspiration and that sense of criticalness, and feeling them both in my life can be difficult to manage emotionally. Do you feel like having friends along the way with you helps? I mean, Virginia's asking, many writers find that it's helpful to have some support from peers, but being the C.S. Lewis Foundation, we of course love the Inklings, and that their friendship really helped them hone their craft, really helped inspire some of that craft. Do you have your own Inklings?
I have found that very difficult. Okay. I find, particularly with, and maybe with artists, it's different, but there is a, I mean, I'm sure this is true for a lot of different professions within the artistic community, but I find that the writers, the novelists that I admire are also quite competitive. And I don't like that feeling. I don't want to feel like I'm competing with someone else, either in terms of audience or sales or whatever. And so in most cases, what I will do is I'll attend as many of their classes as I can, learn from them, but the sort of connections at the Inklings level that I have are with people that are in the industry that are teaching me because they are also working with me.
Right.
So there are two producers in particular in LA, three, one in London and two in LA. My literary agent, who's been a friend now for almost 30 years. And so that's the one side, that's the creative side. And then on the other side, I have my prayer group, which I've been meeting with for 20 years. And I'm the only one of this group that are not pastors. And we meet every week. It's actually, COVID has kept me from being with them since February, but
oh, no.
Yeah, they're in Florida. But anyway, so it's a difficult question for me to answer.
Yeah, partly the reason I ask about the Inklings is because, you know, COVID brings up this sense that we really need each other. You know, that what we really need in life is friendship, is community, and that is something that we can be in prayer for you, Davis, that you finally get back to be with your friends and can pray together. And I'm going to come back to you in a moment to ask you one more question. Okay. But yes, this has been so great to speak to you, to get to know a little bit about what goes on in the mind of a writer, how you spend your day, you know, and you've had so many years of experience. It's just been so inspiring hearing some of your stories. So I'm going to come back to you in a minute. But right now, in this webinar, I'm going to ask Kirk Manton to join us. And Kirk's going to tell us about something really special. Hello, Kirk.
Hello. Hey,
there you are.
I've been out here on the side listening, and I'm just caught up in it all. Very excited. Yeah.
So amazing. So Kirk is our events production manager for the C.S. Lewis Foundation, and he's going to tell us about our next webinar.
Yes, our next webinar is with our good friend and Inklings scholar, Diane Glyer. And you may know, if you've been around, that she is a longtime speaker and good friend of ours for a long time. And we look forward to her talking about the Inklings and how they wrote in a community and what that experience is like. She has a couple books on that are fantastic, and she has other works that she's going to talk with us about. So we're looking forward to that, very much so. And also, if you're this is going to happen in September 19th. And before that, in September, if you're going to be around, if anyone's going to be around in the Colorado Springs area, Diana is going to be speaking at the Anthem Society's Rocky Mountain Artists Retreat. And the Anselm Society is full of like-minded folks and friends of ours, and they especially focus in on serving creatives. And we'll be adding their link, if you're interested, we'll be adding their link into the chat section. So we hope that next month you'll join us here virtually in September, and that's what I'm excited about. We're looking forward to it. Give us some more perspective on the creative process and creative people who we are and God's made us to be. So back to you, Amber.
Thanks, Kirk. So we know with the C.S. Lewis Foundation, we should have been together 2 weeks ago in England, where we could have met with Davis live, but the Lord has in his graciousness given us a year of pause. And in this year, we're meeting together monthly in webinars. So we've had one webinar, and now we're starting them every month. By the way, if you want to read a book about Diana's, Bandersnatch is a great one. So take a picture of this, write it down, read this before next month. Davis, a couple more thoughts before we say goodbye. And also one more thing. Today in our webinar is the very first time we are offering a breakout session afterwards. So there are all of a sudden lots of questions that people have, and we want to get together. One of our values at the C.S. Lewis Foundation is community and learning together in community, worshiping together in community. So today, many of you have signed up for breakout groups. So in a moment, I'm going to tell you how to find the information for that breakout group. But I have one more question for Davis. Okay, Davis? So you have had all this experience. You have written books in how many genres?
I don't know.
Oh, good. You shouldn't know. Maybe that's something you do. What's on your bucket list? Like, what have you not done yet that you just can't wait to tackle?
Oh, that is a tough one. That is a tough one. I was contracted 2 weeks ago to do the pilot and first episode, pilot and the first episode following the pilot. So pilot and the second episode, and what's called the first season Bible for a new streaming project. And I would love to have a chance to see that through. I've never had that happen. I've seen a film go out, but to be involved in something that's ongoing like this, I would just, that would be magic. That really would.
Would you tell us when we can see this? I mean, because we would love to stay in closer contact with you. I mean, is it like a year out? Is that the way these things work? Or?
It depends. It depends. We are hoping that this would go to Netflix. And because they just did these 2 trial balloons, one was called Sweet Magnolia and the other was Virgin River. Okay. And they went from nothing to being 2 of their top 10s within a period of weeks.
I've seen those on Netflix. Yeah.
Right. So there's the possibility that they are recognizing a need for something that is not in that dark and edgy orientation, which handles so much of their work. I'd just like to say, if there are a lot of other questions that do come up out of this, and if people would like to get in touch with me, if they could write the C.S. Lewis Foundation, obviously they're on the mailing list. If you would pass on these, then I would be more than happy to set up some form of interchange. It would be best if I could go through you. Sure. And so that it's shared with everyone. But if there's an ongoing discussion on the creative side that your readers would like to have, I would be more than happy to see that continue.
Well, I have some ideas for how to do that. It would be fun to put those into practice, just to keep keep in contact and see what else is going through your mind that can encourage us. Before I give some instructions for our breakout groups, can you just say some encouragement for those of us who are writers or creatives that might be struggling?
Yes, I think the honest answer to this is that we need to stop seeing the struggle as an opponent and accept that it is simply part of this whole thing. One of the issues, can I take a couple of minutes or do I need to shut up now?
Yes, no, you can take a couple of minutes.
One of the things that has helped me the most, I think, in the last 4 or 5 years of my creative life is accepting the need to have a time of doubt where I can basically just unload all of these issues that I have prior to trying to put it down on the page.
Yeah.
I was struggling with a very big novel, which became actually the start of the Miramar Bay series. And I decided that I was going to write the entire book out by hand first before putting it into the computer. And strangely enough, I do feel like that it's actually accelerated my progress. And the reason for this is that I will sketch out a couple of days before it actually goes down on the computer. I will sketch out the scene and then set it aside. And during that time, I'm able to question it, doubt it. There's no need to defend it because it hasn't actually been written yet. I've just had these ideas that have percolated. And the result is the flow is much stronger to the point where I'm now writing every book, every screenplay is done by hand first before it goes down on the computer page.
Wow.
And I do feel like it's really, really helped my writing. This has been the creative process challenge that I'm facing right now, is doubt.
Yeah. Well, that could be a really interesting trick for some of us. I'm currently working on composing and have hit a little bit of a block. So maybe I'll try to get out the old pen or pencil and paper and see if that works for me.
Try to get 2 or 3 days ahead of where you would like to be in actually writing the structure and just doing this. Another thing that I found is in writing the one-page overview during usually the first third of the book, I will carry a second notebook with me everywhere. And the first page simply says, what is it about? And if I can get to the point of answering that, the whole story moves more freely. And I think perhaps that might help you with your songwriting as well.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
I'm going to try that. Davis, it's been such a joy speaking with you today.
Thank you. Likewise.
Wow, I am so encouraged. I'm going to give some instructions and then give a prayer. So folks, it's been really fun to have you with us today. Thank you to those of you who have written questions that I'm sorry I didn't get to, but we're going to write those down and see if we can ask Davis behind the scenes. I'd like to thank Stephen Elmore, the Executive Vice President of the C.S. Lewis Foundation, Lancia Smith, Chris Howell, and Kirk Manton of our Webinar Planning Committee, Chris Hernandez, who is behind the scenes doing some video editing, and Melanie Stiles and Jen Bonnard, who will be helping with our Zoom group discussions just now. So if you're coming to a breakout group, here's what's going to happen. We're going to end this webinar call. Then you're going to go to your email, and you're going to get the one from Steve that says something like discussion group on Zoom. It should be not this webinar that you just logged into, but the Zoom discussion group. It'll take us a couple minutes to make sure everyone has arrived electronically, but we really look forward to chatting with you about what Davis said that you'd like to follow up on, getting to know one another. It'll be a great time to meet new friends and strengthen old ones. I'm going to pray for us as we go. Lord Jesus, you have done such amazing things in Davis's life. Thank you that when you met him and when he first understood that he needed to follow you as a Christian, you were kind enough to follow that with a call on his life artistically. And Lord, we're looking back now at so many years of fruit in his life. And so, Lord, I want to pray for all of us who are on this call. I pray, Lord, that you would meet us as where we are, both creatively and wherever we are with our work or with our family. Lord, would you move in our lives, and would you be the surgeon that needs to make any changes so that as we look back in our life, we can see the same kind of fruit. We can see year after year of walking with you. So Lord, we offer this time to you in great thanksgiving for being able to talk to our friend across the pond. In all this, we pray in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Davis. It's been wonderful. We will. I hope to see you in live and in person next summer when we
next
come
year.
to Oxford.
Yes. That would be
Yes.
great. Yeah.
Next year in Oxford.
Next year in Oxford. Take care. God bless.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everybody. So great to have you. Bye-bye.